unmute me. There you
Hello, hello, dear client. Hello, dear client. Is that you in?
Yes.
Excellent. Win,
Yeah.
I see that your video is on, but I'm not getting any video image.
I'm not good at this, so I have no idea why.
Pardon?
I said I don't really know why. This is not my area. I have no idea. I very rarely do Zoom.
Another question. Do you have PowerPoint slides?
No.
Okay. Well, we can hear you, but I can't see you.
All I know is that I've got my video camera on. And other than that, I don't know why.
Okay. Yeah, I see that you have your video camera on. I don't think there's anything I can do from my end to fix this problem.
I don't know. I'm at home. I work I work remotely. I'm not at the office, so I don't have anybody to be able to help me with it.
Okay, so maybe this will be audio only unless you can find a way to get your video to work.
And I come on 15 minutes early because these kinds of things happen sometimes.
Unfortunately, they do.
I've never had a problem being on video before, but as I said, I really don't know what the problem is. I have no clue.
Okay. So can you see the video for the menu here? It's under my name, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Graham Ford is at the front to do the introductions.
Right.
Can I speak now, Ken? Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Win. Sorry, I haven't seen you. I believe you're there.
I am here.
Yes, thank you, Win. Wonderful to see you today. And thank you all the people who are here on Zoom. We have a number of people on Zoom and a small number of people here in the auditorium as well. So welcome to the talk today, and can everybody hear me okay here? I guess so. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, but before I do that, Saya van Gies from the Go-Go Grannies has a little announcement she would like to make about next week's meeting. Here she is.
Thank you, and not only next week's, but the generosity of the Summer Lecture Series Club. I mean, the Go-Go Grandmothers, we love this club. They've already given us $1,000 to start with, and not only that, the donations are people that are here live, although we are getting some from outline as well. That's added up to almost close to another $200. So thank you, thank you. Now, our next speaker on the Monday the 17th is Robin Scobie. And as we speak, Robin Scobie is part of a grandmother group from here, Canada, who each paid their own $7,000 to be part of this group, so there's no expense to the foundation. And as we speak, this small group of grandmothers are right now in Africa. They are experiencing in person what this money that you're donating looks like in action. So there's a number of these amazing projects that are happening, and Robin will come back to Canada, and then on the 17th, she's going to be our speaker. So I encourage all of us, get that message out there, and get them to pay the $10 to come for one, or if they're already paid for the whole season, then by all means, encourage that, because it's going to be an absolutely fascinating story. Thank you, Graham. And thank all of you.
Thank you very much, Saya. We look forward to that. And welcome everybody today. As I say, we have a number of people on Zoom and also some people in the auditorium here. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Wahrer this morning. Win has a most remarkable career. About 30 years ago, she became concerned about the wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin, and she started an organization. She actually founded an organization called Justice for Guy Paul Morin, and just on her own, or with a couple of volunteers, she started a petition to get him exonerated. And in fact, it was quite a long, extraordinary saga. He had 2 trials. In the second one, he was found guilty and spent a short time in jail. It was only, he was on the point of appealing, and just as the appeal was about to be heard, they finally got some DNA evidence that proved that Guy Paul Morin was not the murderer of that little girl, Christine Jessop, that was her name, sorry.
Christine Jessop.
Can't remember her name. And Wynne spent an awful lot of time on Guy Paul Morin's exoneration, and she also got involved with David Milgaard, who was also exonerated after spending 22 years in jail. We all know that story. And this gave rise to an organization called Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, subsequently changed to Innocence Canada. And over the last 30 years or so, there have actually been 30 more exonerees that the organization has been able to prove were wrongly convicted. But the most remarkable thing is that Wahrer not only worked on the exoneration of some people who were wrongly convicted, but she actually has changed the law in Canada. She's been instrumental in something called Bill 30, which gives people who feel they've been wrongly convicted the opportunity to have their convictions a second look at the convictions. And so Wahrer not only has done some remarkable work, she's actually changed the law of the land here in Canada. So, and she's also changed the way that police and the Attorney General's office look at investigations when there's been a murder or a serious crime. So with that, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Wahrer today. And she's joining us from Toronto. She was going to come here personally, but she's just spent a week in Fort McMurray and another few days in New Brunswick working with people who are working on their wrongful conviction or perpetrated wrongful convictions in those two centres. So please join me in welcoming Wahrer today. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I appreciate the invitation. Sorry, the video doesn't seem to be working on my end. I'm not very savvy when it comes to this sort of stuff. I don't do it very often, and generally speaking, I'd rather be in person. And it looks like a room that I would be very comfortable in. It looks almost like a church, and I love churches. So thank you, Graham. Of course, we've met each other before, and I appreciate the invitation and to be able to speak a bit about the work that Innocence Canada does and how it all got started and where we are today. But I would just want to make a correction. It's Bill C-40, and I have not changed the law. Bill C-40 was very hard fought on by our organization, David Milgaard and Joyce Milgaard, who the law is actually named after. It's called the David and Joyce Milgaard Law. And what it is there's a new commission been blessed by the Liberal government, and it is a new commission that's going to look at miscarriages of justice, that's going to be independent of the justice system. So it's going to be an independent group of people that are going to look at miscarriages of justice. The system as we have it right now is that we have to go to the CCRG, or the Canadian Case Review Group in Ottawa, which is connected to the justice system, and that's where we have to go when we submit an application based on fresh evidence to be able to clear somebody's name, which is the work that we do primarily. And you spoke about Guy Paul Morin, of course, was the very first case I was ever involved in, and that's where it all started. I was one of those people, as I'm sure everybody who's watching or attending in person at the venue probably have gone through this in your life, but I was going through a period in my life where I belonged to a church. I was very active, very busy, had a family and so on and so forth, but I was going through that period in my life sort of saying, well, I see everybody else's gifts, but what am I here for? Like, why am I on this earth? What is my purpose? And it was during that period of time of really trying to decide what I was supposed to be doing. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Is there something I should be doing that I'm not doing, that kind of thing? And that was at the point that the Toronto Star started to deliver papers free of charge. And I was not somebody who got a paper delivered to my home. I bought it one occasionally, but not on a regular basis. I presume I got most of my information from the news on television. And but it happened to be that I got a newspaper, and the first paper I picked up and read, they had an article on Guy Paul Morin. And Guy Paul Morin, at the time I learned about his case, had already been found not guilty, had lost on appeal, and was doing the motions in preparation for a second trial. So I got involved just prior to his second trial, and I read the article, and I don't remember exactly what it said today, but I remember looking at the photograph they had of him, and I believe this was divine intervention, and I just looked at his picture and I went, oh my God, they got the wrong guy. And I became very convicted about Guy Paul Morin's innocence. I followed the case very closely. I read everything I could about it and got actively involved in, telling people about the case at my church and so on and so forth. And so then, and I remember exactly where I was the day that it came over the airwaves that Guy Paul Morin had just been convicted of first-degree murder. I was at a place called Whitevale, Ontario, at a stop sign waiting to go on the highway to Unionville, Ontario. And I was not surprised, because there was something about the jury that bothered me, but I was outraged. And I thought, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I cannot sit here and do nothing. I have to do something. I don't know what it is I can do, but I have to do something. And the only thing that I could think of to do was to write a couple of letters, and I did. One was to Jack Binkowski, who represented Guy Paul Morin at a second trial and who was devastated, as you could see on the news later in the day, at losing the trial. And the other letter I sent was, and what I did in that letter was encourage them to continue on with the appeal process. And then in my other letter, it was to well, I used to call them Morin, but the Morin family. And in that letter, I basically, was worried about what their life was like, because often if you have someone in your family who's done something wrong, you pay the price along with them, and maybe not as heavy a price, but you're ostracized. And I didn't know if they were being ostracized. People were pummeling stones at their window. I had no idea what their life was like, being the parents and the family of Guy Paul Morin. So I sent a letter to them and basically said, I'm not omnipotent, I'm certainly not God, but I do believe if Christine Jessop could point her finger from the grave, she would not be pointing at Guy Paul Morin, their son, their brother, whoever. So, and then I went off to Edmonton, Alberta. I had the letters with me, and I was going off to Edmonton to visit a good friend. And I remember getting to the airport and going through the turnstile, and I said, if I don't mail these letters today, it just won't mean the same thing. So I went out and I mailed the letters, and then got on the airplane, went off, had a wonderful time, forgot about the letters, and I got back to Toronto, was not well, and it was very early in the morning. And then later in the morning, I got a call, and a woman was on the phone, and because I mispronounced her name, I didn't catch her name. And she said, thank you for the lovely note. And I'm thinking, who did I give a note to? And then I realized it was Mrs., who I called then Mrs. Morin, but it's Morin. And she was calling to thank me for the letter. And then her daughter, Deanne, got on the phone, and that was the call that changed my life, the course of my life. And they wanted to get together with me, her and her husband. I lived in Pickering, they lived in Ajax. And so I wasn't going to say no, even though I wasn't feeling very well. I wasn't going to say no. So the next day, I met them in my living room, and we discussed, Paul's case. And then I tell students, be careful when you say these words, because this is exactly what I said to Bill and Deanne. I said, if there's anything I can do to help, well, I couldn't think of anything I could do, but they thought of a whole bunch of things I could do. And one of the things they wanted me to do was meet with a couple of friends. One was a friend of Paul's older brother, and the other was the wife of one of Mr. Morin's co-workers. And they wanted me to meet with them because they were trying to get a petition together, but they couldn't seem to get it done. And so I have no idea anything about petitions, never did one in my life, but since I opened my big mouth and said I'd do whatever, I decided I had to go and meet with these two people and see what I could do to help out. And that's what I did. Met with them at Gita Hobson's house. And Gita Hobson at the time was pregnant, and Steve, neither one of them stayed very long on the case because of other issues. But we met in Gita Hobson's living room. We got the petition completed, and then we sort of sat around and said, well, the three of us believe he's innocent, so what are we going to do about that? And so we decided to start a support group, and it was called the Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee. And that's really, we had no idea the kind of attention it was going to bring. We were just three people who believed in somebody's innocence. None of us were lawyers. We all, and then Gita and Steve Seymour actually didn't stay on, but all told, at the end of the day, there were 6 people on this committee. 2 of them were a minister and his wife, Walter Ridley, who's still alive today, and his wife who passed away, but they were wonderful. They often let us use their church to have meetings and so on and so forth. And then James Lockyer, who Jack Binkowski passed on the Guy Paul Morin case to. He was to do the appeal if there was going to be another appeal. And he found out about us and asked to meet with us. And then that's how I met James Lockyer. And really, it was because of the meeting with James Lockyer. Reuben Hurricane Carter also became a part of our organization. And when the Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee was doing what they could to bring attention to Guy Paul Morin's case, and one of the things we were bringing attention to was his bail hearing. And that's when I was met. And then we wanted to meet a real live wrongly convicted person, and the person suggested by James Lockyer to me was Reuben Hurricane Carter. And I didn't know.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. We don't see your face on the screen here. I thought I had it earlier, but we don't. Could you perhaps have a look at your setting on your computer?
I have no idea how to do that, Graham. I have no clue what. Yeah, it's not. Generally speaking, when I do, I'll occasionally do Zoom where I go on camera, but most of the time when I have meetings with my office or anything, I'm never on camera.
Okay, well, don't worry. We can hear you beautifully.
And I have no idea how to get on. I've got the camera turned on. That's all I know to do. Nobody's in my house. My daughter's gone to work and so on, so she probably know how to figure it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we'll listen to you.
Yeah. So anyway, now where was I? Yes. Okay. Wait a minute.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to remember what I said last. Because I don't write anything down. I'm just telling you my story. But in any case, I believe I was talking about James Lockyer and how he heard me. I believe it was on radio, and decided that he didn't realize that there was his client had a support group. And so he decided he'd like to meet with us. And so that's really how I met James Lockyer. And then he suggested we needed a real live wrongly convicted person. And so he suggested a Reuben Hurricane Carter, and that's another story all in itself. And eventually, I'm not going to go through the whole how I got in touch with Reuben Hurricane Carter, because he didn't really know anything about Reuben except that he had been wrongly convicted and Canadians had helped him, but he didn't know the names of the Canadians. He thought Reuben lived in Canada somewhere, but he didn't quite know where. And so thank goodness Kurt Macon of the Globe and Mail happened to call me, and he, as it turned out, the book that he wrote, Red Drum and the Innocent, about the Guy Paul Morin case, was published by the same publisher that published the story of the Canadians who helped Reuben Hurricane Carter, and called Lazarus and the Hurricane. They had written a book which was got me in contact. The first of the Don jail, because what we asked him to do was go and meet with Guy Paul Morin, who was in Toronto waiting to go to his bail hearing. And then, it never occurred to me that he could come out and tell me that he was guilty of sin. I was just totally convinced of Guy Paul Morin's innocence that it never occurred to me that anything like that could happen. But as it turned out, that's not what he said when he came out on the steps of the Don jail and spoke about Guy Paul Morin. And then he later on became the executive director of the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. We reconstituted the Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee, and it became the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. And so we, after Guy Paul Morin, even before Guy Paul Morin was acquitted, we were actually trying to help other people. And but Guy Paul Morin was at my house actually getting ready. He was not in very good shape. His sister had called me. He wasn't supposed to come until the night, the Friday night. And he came the Thursday night because his sister called me and said he wasn't doing very well. He didn't want to go out and shop for a new suit or shoes or anything to go to the Court of Appeal. And he was not in a good way. And I just lost a cat, and I had to sort of bring things in perspective. So Paul came over to my house, and I remember turning to him and saying, "Paul, do you believe in miracles?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Well, you're about to have one." And then I looked up to the heavens and I said, "Please, may I not be lying to him?" And just 5 minutes after that, James Lockyer called and was looking for Guy Paul Morin, didn't know where he was. And I said, "Well, he's right here." I put Paul on the phone, and he told Paul he needed him to get down to his house because the DNA results were coming in. So when Paul got off the phone, he told me, I said, "You're a free man." And he said, "What?" And I said, "You're a free man." And he says, "Well, how do you know that?" And I said, "Because if the DNA results," and I said, "it's not ticker tape. I believe they're already in." I said, "You are a free man." And he said, "Well, if you're lying to me, I'm going to come back and kick your butt." And I basically said, "You can come back and do anything you want, but I'm telling you right now, you're a free man." And then James called me and basically said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, you didn't tell me to get down there. You told Paul." So I got down there, and Paul met me at the veranda with this very glum look on his face, looking very dejected. And I just pushed him aside and I said, "Oh, give me a break." And I opened the door, and of course, there were all kinds of people celebrating inside the house. There were many people involved in law firms that were involved in one way or the other in supporting our work on the Guy Paul Morin case, and they were all there. And so the DNA ended up clearing Paul, but it took till 2020, October the 15th, 2020, 36 years later, for the actual perpetrator to be identified. And it happened to be a next door neighbor of the Jessop family, a man who was never, ever, ever questioned by the police. His wife was. She babysat Christine Jessop, but he was never. He sort of flew under the radar, and he ended up committing suicide in 2015. But a man by the name of Calvin Hoover was the man who actually committed the murder and the rape of little Christine Jessop. And as far as I know, according to the police anyway, he never committed another crime. But certainly, if you were to look at the reasons why innocent people get wrongly convicted, Guy Paul Morin's case is a good one to look at, because almost all the systemic issues that give rise to wrongful conviction are in the Guy Paul Morin case, except one, which is a false confession. He never, ever, ever, ever confessed. But in any case, that's where it all began. And Paul just recently testified at the standing committee hearing about Bill C-40. And you could tell, even after all these years, the pain that still exists. The stigma does not go away. And once you're labeled a murderer, it's very hard to get on with your life, and you can be compensated, et cetera, but it doesn't change what you went through and the nightmares you had to live through, and how your parents and your family had to suffer along with you. Those things just never go away. And Paul said during the standing committee, because he was, of course, supporting this new commission, and he said that just 2 weeks prior to testifying, a woman had called him. He has a business, and a woman had called him, and she didn't know his first name, but she knew his last name was Morin, and she says, "What a terrible last name to have." And so it just never, ever goes away. And Paul once said to me, people were asking for his autograph and so on. And he says, "Why are people asking for my autograph?" He says, "I didn't cure cancer. I'm only known. My name is associated with a heinous, horrible crime. And that's the only reason people know it." And I said, "Well, I think the reason they're asking for your autograph, Paul, is because they don't think they could have survived what you survived. I think they think of you as a survivor, and they appreciate that you were able to withstand what you had to get to the end and to finally get your name cleared. So I think it's out of admiration for your strength, your tenacity, and your courage." And so in any case, we've gone on to look at obviously other cases. David Milgaard, as Graham mentioned, was one of those cases. Unfortunately, David, who became a really, really good friend, passed away in 2022. But he and his mother, who fought valiantly for him, were a big, big part of not only my life, but of the organization. But we've had, at one time we used to call it the 3 M's, because when we first began, it seemed like everybody's name started with an M. Donald Marshall Jr., whose case we did not look at. He's from my home province of Nova Scotia, and he was wrongly convicted prior to us ever coming together as a group. But he was the first recognized wrongful conviction in Canada. He was the first person to get a Royal Commission of Inquiry. He was the first person to be compensated, and he was also a hero amongst the Aboriginal people, because he, with a grade 6 education, went to the Supreme Court of Canada twice on fisheries disputes and won. And so Junior was very important. We have an award, actually, that is named after Donald Marshall Jr. that we give out on every wrongful conviction day, which is October the 2nd of every year. And last year it was given to a wonderful man, Rajang Hines from Quebec, who fought valiantly for 50 years to clear his name. And we presented him with that award. And the first year it was given to Marie Coffin Stewart, who's been fighting for the last 70 years for her brother, Wilbur Coffin, who was executed. He was hung in Quebec in 1956. So she received the very first time we gave that award. And we have 2 other awards we give out. One is the Reuben Hurricane Carter Champion of Justice Award and the Tracy Tyler Award, which is either exposed to wrongful through writing a book, podcast, media, newspaper articles, whatever it is. So there's 3 awards that we give out every year. I could go on and talk about the cases, but we primarily look at homicide cases. These are the people that spend the longest period of time in prison. These are the cases we look at. And we have made, however, 3 exceptions in our 30. I think I've been doing this for 32 years. The organization Innocence Canada, or AIDWIC's, been around for 31 years. But at the end of the day, usually we do first degree, second degree manslaughter or self-defense, but you have to be innocent. You have to be able to prove your innocence. And that's a very difficult task, because most of the time a case gets to it's a cold case. And if we look at some of our most recent cases, such as the A.J. Woodhouse and Brian Anderson case, Clarence Woodhouse, their case was 50 years old by the time their names got cleared. They're out of Manitoba. And one of my things that people often ask, when are you going to retire? When are you going to do this? And I said, when they declare people innocent, and when, they validate them by declaring them outrightly innocent. And in the Brian Anderson case, in the A.J. Woodhouse case, and in the Clarence Woodhouse case, the Chief Justice of Manitoba actually did declare each of those men innocent. And he not only declared A.J. and Brian innocent because their trial was separate from Clarence, but he also declared them heroes. And they were 2 Indigenous young men who were 17 and 18 years old when they were convicted of the murder of a convenience store worker. And I was happy to be in Winnipeg when their names were cleared, and it was a real joy to be there to hear Justice Royale declare them, Joel, sorry, not only declare to acquit them, but to openly call them innocent. It was really, because I remember sitting there, looking at him when he was giving his decision and going, say it, say it, say it, in my head, and he did. And I was very happy about that. And he did the same thing for Clarence, who was also a co-accused. And we have a case out of New Brunswick, the Bobby Mailman and Wally Gillespie case, which was 40 years old by the time that they got their names cleared. And it doesn't mean they spent 40 years in prison, and it doesn't mean that Clarence and AJ and Brian spent 30 years or 50 years in prison. In fact, Brian spent 12, AJ spent 23, and Clarence, I believe, spent about 12 as well. So, but nevertheless, 1 second in prison for a crime you didn't commit is 1 second too long. Not only is the second in prison too long, but going in front of a judge, being charged and accused, charged, and convicted should never happen to an innocent person, in my opinion, because your life begins to go down the tubes immediately when you become a suspect. Your credibility, and if you had any money or you had a house, you're probably going to lose it, because it costs a tremendous amount of money to defend yourself. And Guy Paul Morin, I was talking about the 3 M's, was Donald Marshall Jr. was the first M, the first person to be wrongly convicted. It should have been David Milgaard second, but it ended up being Guy Paul Morin. He actually got his name cleared before David Milgaard did. But David Milgaard at that time had the best case scenario, because not only did the DNA clear David Milgaard's name, but also identified the perpetrator, Larry Fisher. So he sort of, in many of our cases, we don't know. We know who didn't do it. We don't always know who did do it. And then we've also had a lot of cases we call from the Smith cases, because of Dr. Charles Smith, who was a so-called a pediatric forensic pathologist who made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of people were wrongly convicted because of his incompetence. And, such as William Mullins Johnson and Tammy Marquardt, Sherry Charette Robinson, Dinesh Kumar, Richard Brandt, and so on. So in total, we now have Innocence Canada has now been involved in helping or aiding 31 people to clear their names. So that's where we stand at the present. We just had 2 cases. I was in Alberta on the Roy Zabodiak case last week, where Roy spent 36 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. he went for a bail hearing, which I attended along with James Lockyer and Joanne McLean from our organization, and a lovely lawyer from Alberta who helped us out, Katie, and the judge gave him bail, although the Crown wanted him to be put on house arrest. The judge was not having anything to do with that, and thankfully, and I went with Roy to Fort McMurray, where he is going to be staying until the Crown decides whether they're going to retry him or what the resolution is going to be. So Roy is going to have to wait until the Crown makes a decision. So as you can see, the road to exoneration, or the road to being acquitted, is a very long road of many challenges, roadblocks, and pain and suffering. There is nothing happy about these cases, not anything at all that I can think of. And then when you get acquitted, you go out to the court of public opinion, and everybody has an opinion. And some people believe we get people off. Some people believe, that they are declared acquitted, but they're really guilty, and so they have to deal with a great deal even after they are acquitted. And so I don't know our organization. You might know how it runs and where we get our funding. I mean, that might be something of interest in how we do our work. So when we began, it was all totally volunteer. Every person who looked at a case, every person who was involved was a volunteer. They did everything free and for nothing. Then as time went on, we were able to accumulate a little bit of funding. We now have some lawyers on staff who review cases. They are not lawyers who go into court. You can't call our office, and many people do. I just had a call this morning, actually, who are looking for a lawyer. But we're not a law office per se. Even though we have lawyers in our office, we are not allowed to give you legal advice, and we can't represent you. And our job is totally on looking into wrongful convictions and reviewing and reinvestigating cases in hopes of finding the fresh evidence to be able to prove somebody's innocence. That is totally what we do. And then if we can find the fresh evidence, we write what we call a Section 696.1 application, which is ministerial review, which currently goes to the CCRG and then eventually to the Justice Minister, who makes a decision on whether there's a likelihood of a miscarriage of justice. And if there is, then he can order it back for a new trial or to the Court of Appeal. And most of our cases have gone back to the Court of Appeal, but luckily for A.J. Woodhouse and Brian Anderson and for Bobby Mailman and Wally Gillespie, it went back for a new trial, and that trial lasted, I think, an hour. And they were then had their names cleared. Currently, we are heading to the Court of Appeal with a couple of cases. And on Friday, on May the 30th, Rob Sanderson, who's originally from Manitoba, and the crime happened in Manitoba, but lives in BC, he had his conviction quashed by Manitoba. So that's really up to date where we are with the cases. But if anybody has any questions or you want to know about any case in particular, if you know the work of Innocence Canada, you may know what we do. But I think it's probably wise for me to ask questions because I don't want to go on. And our major funding, by the way, comes from the Law Foundation of Ontario, but we do have independent people who fund us, and we have memberships and people who give donations. So that's basically where we get our money from.
Thank you very much, Wynne. Much obliged to you for that long explanation of what you've been doing all these years. It's quite amazing. Are there any questions here from people in the audience? Oh, okay. There may be some online as well.
I have a comment from the gallery.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. If I can speak from the Zoom.
Please do.
Man's a predator.
A lot of kids. Thinks this gene should be passed on.
Yes, do you have a question?
Can I speak from the Zoom?
Yes, please do.
Okay. It's not so much a question. I just wanted to thank the speaker for her life's work. It's inspiring. And I can't help but connect it with a program on Matt Galloway's The Current this morning when he was interviewing Rutger Bregman, who'd written a new book called Moral Ambition, Stop Wasting Your Time and Start Making a Difference. And today's speaker is just an amazing example of someone who saw something that needed to be done and just started doing it, and has had an amazing impact as a result of that. And I am so appreciative of how you have spent your life making a difference. So thank you very much for that.
Now you have me in tears. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. That was very warm. I have, there's a question here from Saga from Geest. I'm going to pass the.
Let me echo the admiration. It's just a remarkable, remarkable story, and I really, really appreciate that the club invited you to share it with us. It's just remarkable. I do have a question. You mentioned at the beginning when you first started to be active on the Paul case some 30 years ago, and you said we were surprised how it just touched people and the response and how it became a societal news story. Can you account for that? What was it when really we hadn't heard much about people that were convicted and that were innocent, and yet your story, what was it about that, do you think, that just people it touched their hearts and they wanted to learn more about it? What was that?
I think you hit on it. It was because wrongful convictions until about 30 odd years ago was never talked about. Nobody was talking about wrongful convictions. Most people don't know a wrongly convicted person, and most people don't know somebody who's in prison. So it was a novelty. And I think one of the things that I was told, because when we did this petition and we had people faxing it when Paul was going up for bail, they said that we actually, the fax machines, we were sending so many signatures and so on that we actually broke down the they were getting too many, and it really, I don't know the right terminology, but broke down the system there because so many were coming in. And what was told to me was that people were fascinated because we were, and the Toronto Star called us neophytes, and they were absolutely right. We were neophytes. We had no clue what we were doing. We just did what we thought we needed to do, but nobody ever closed the door, whether it was the justice critic we asked to meet with or whoever it was. But they said it was because they were fascinated that none of us knew Guy Paul Morin, that we were all there fighting for somebody that we had no personal relationship with. And they thought for people to sort of come out of the woodwork and to be, to lend their voices to somebody who was convicted of the rape and the murder of a 9-year-old child. They said it just really got people to thinking and people respecting the fact that, that because all of us, including myself, if this were to happen to me or to you, we would want somebody to stand up and speak on our behalf, right? And I think that's when people realized, that they took note. And I think the fascination was that we didn't know him, that we were fighting for somebody we had absolutely no relationship with. I think that was what seemed to be the driving force of why there was such an interest. Now, over the years, because there's so much on Netflix and there's so much about wrongful convictions, I find people are getting complacent again, because some people, if it didn't happen to me, it didn't happen kind of attitude. But, because I send out news articles every day about once a week at least, but sometimes every day about a wrongful conviction somewhere in the world. And I think people are inundated by it, but I think we can never become complacent, because one thing I know for sure, there is somebody being wrongly convicted right now somewhere in this world. It will continue and around the world, and we just don't know where it is, when it is, or who it is, but it's not stopping. People are still being wrongly convicted, and even though we've been doing this work now for 32 years, there's a long way to go. Our system is broken and it needs fixing.
Thank you. When I have a question, one of your latest cases is Roy Sabotiak. I see that he was originally convicted 36 years ago. It's hard to imagine that he spent virtually his whole adult life in jail. But the original conviction was that there was to be no parole for 16 and a half years. So I would have expected him to spend 16 and a half years, but in fact he spent 36 years in jail. How could that happen?
Well, Roy Zabodiak, I don't know if you know what the Mr. Big Sting is. It's an undercover. It's only in Canada. Unfortunately, New Zealand and Australia picked up on it, but sorry, I have to shut this phone. What happened was that for Roy Zabodiak, he was the unfortunate victim of a Mr. Big Sting operation, an undercover sting operation. When the police have a favorite suspect, but they don't have any evidence of which to charge them, then what they do, it started in British Columbia, that's where it was created, and but it's been done across Canada, but primarily used to be done in Alberta and BC, and as it turns out, Roy Zabodiak is from Edmonton, Alberta. And when they couldn't find the evidence, but they have a favorite suspect, what they do is the sting operation, and what they know everything about you there is to know before they begin it. They do their homework, they know who you are, they know your lifestyle, etc., etc., and so they know how to approach you, so to speak. And Roy Zabodiak, unfortunately, was 26 years of age. He'd had a very, dysfunctional upbringing. I'm going to put that kindly. And, he was involved in drugs, and he was drinking, and, he was, into punk rock, that kind of stuff, which does not, of course, make you a murderer. But, he had some stuff going against him. And so when they did the sting operation, eventually he confessed, which is the reason behind a sting operation. They basically know that you're a suspect, and they know your life's in the toilet. And so along comes this guy that befriends you and makes you feel like he's going to help you, and all you have to do is tell him the worst thing you've ever done. And it doesn't matter how many times you say you didn't do it. The only time it matters is when you said you did do it. And the only way they can help you is if you admit to it. So anyway, Roy confessed to killing Susie Kaminsky, who used to babysit him actually years prior. And her body, by the way, has never been found to this very day. But that's how Roy Zabodiak got convicted in the first place, was through this confession. And then reasons why he remained in prison for 36 years was because if you do not admit to your index offense and show remorse, you're not getting paroled for the most part. People who maintain their innocence, it bodes against them, generally speaking. And now, in the last few years, or maybe a little bit more than a few, I was told by the National Parole Board that they no longer require you to admit to your index offense. But the problem is, what I've learned is they forgot to tell the people on the ground, the parole officers in the prisons, that you don't have to confess to your index offense, because they've been, in recent months, actually really strong-arming people in prison who are professing innocence to admit to their index offense, basically telling them if you don't admit to your index offense, you'll be going out of here in a pine box. And even though the National Parole Board says that's no longer a requirement. So, so Roy Zabodiak stayed in prison largely because, he may have had some institutional charges, but primarily because he would not admit to his index offense.
Wow.
And I spent a great deal of time with Roy. I was at the bail hearing, and I also went with a 6-hour drive from Edmonton to Fort McMurray, because we have him staying in Fort McMurray, waiting to hear what the Crown's going to do in his case. And right now he's in Fort McMurray waiting for the Crown to make a decision, a final decision on how she's going to proceed with his case. So he's just out on bail. He's not been exonerated.
I just have one more question, if I could ask, from the Zoom.
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned, and I'd like you to comment, if you would, about the racial component of wrongful convictions in terms of the overrepresentation of racial minorities in these wrongful conviction cases.
Well, I think if you came to our office and you looked at the wall, well, we used to have a wall. We moved, so I don't know if the pictures are up there yet. I'm going over to the office later today. But they are primarily a white face in Canada. In the United States, it's primarily a black face. Is there an overrepresentation of Indigenous people? And if you live out west, it's there's an overrepresentation certainly of Indigenous people. In Ontario would be next to, I've been into every prison except Drumheller, and if you walked into an Ontario prison, next to the white inmates, which are the larger number, it would be black, right? So so each district seems to have its overrepresentation. It's different depending where it is. But in Canada, the primary face is a white one, most definitely. But there are people like William Mullins Johnson, who's Ojibwe and Irish, and and then there's Donald Marshall Jr. of course was Mi'kmaq from my home province of Nova Scotia. But certainly I think it's been reported quite successfully and repeatedly that there's an overrepresentation due to population of Indigenous people in prison. Now, I don't know of the number of Indigenous people in prison, how many of those people are innocent. I have no idea.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. One other question, Wynne. Is the prison population aware of Innocence Canada on a large scale, and are they able to actually approach the organization from prison? How easy is that?
Yes, we used to. Many years ago, actually, with somebody from corrections who said, you should put a poster in, and we sent posters out. We used to have a journal. Unfortunately, we don't have it. I wish we did. It was a great journal, which, I created to give a voice and a face to the wrongly convicted. Now it's Wrongful Conviction Day, which I hope it does that every October the 2nd at least. But yes, our number is on the common approved phone number. So people from prison can call us. Now, they still have it listed as the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, but when they call, obviously I say Innocence Canada, but it's one and the same organization. So yeah, most inmates are aware, or at least they have the ability to be aware. And of course, they listen to the news. They read the newspaper, they listen to the news, and so on and so forth. And because anytime we're in the news, I get inundated by calls. Unfortunately, a lot of people who call me don't fit our criteria. We do not look at it, I said, except the cases that I just advised you. I get a lot of calls about sexual assault. We don't look at sexual assault cases. They're very difficult because it's usually a he said, she said case, no witnesses, that kind of thing, and we just don't have the ability, either the human or financial resources to take on those cases. Now, there was one in Quebec last year with an organization in Quebec that they actually got a remedy for a guy that was convicted of sexual assault, and I believe he's been in the newspaper. But last year, Project Innocence Quebec did clear somebody of a sexual assault. But yeah, and then with this new commission that I was talking about, they will look at all cases. All people claiming miscarriages of justice, they will look at it. No matter what you've been convicted of, they will look at the cases. But we're limited because we don't have the resources to do everybody's case. We have a very long wait list of people who do fit our criteria.
Right.
Can I ask another question from the Zoom?
Yes, good.
I'm appalled at the number of people who have been wrongly committed. It seems terribly too much. And you mentioned something about the system being broken. How is it broken, or do you see a way that it can be fixed?
Well, I think everything can be fixed. You just have to have the will to because unfortunately people like the status quo. It's really hard to get change especially, we had one of our board members who was part of government for about 6 years, and he said the last thing anybody in government wants to talk about is the justice system. So the problem is you've got so many. When you think about it, I remember actually doing a speaking engagement for a ladies group one time, and I remember talking about, how I became a part of the NAACJ, was the National Association of Acting in Criminal Justice, even though it's based on, reforming, in corrections and stuff. But I was there because the wrongly convicted are treated exactly like the rightly convicted in prison. There's no difference in how they're treated. And so I wanted to make sure there was humanity, integrity, dignity, and all that stuff for the people that I believe to be innocent there. And I'm okay with everybody being treated that way. But these ladies said to me, they said, "Oh, you want murderers treated this way?" And I said, "Just listen, I've been in prisons across this country. I can't go into a prison and tell you who's innocent and who's guilty. So for me, it's okay to treat everybody with dignity, and integrity and fairness and all that kind of stuff, because, I am not there to judge anybody. I'm hopefully there to help those that we can. But it's very difficult because the system itself, one of the things that bothers me about the system is that when you get a trial, if your lawyer makes a mistake and doesn't do his job, who suffers for that? The person, the wrongly convicted person. And because of the way our system works, you get the trial, everybody thinks all the truth is unraveled, everybody gets a fair break, and isn't life hunky-dory fine, the right decision is made, and you got all your rights. And then, unfortunately, you have your appeal, which is just based basically on legal arguments. So it's not like you can go back in there and re-argue the case again. And, and the other thing is disclosure. We're not entitled to disclosure. And after the case is finished, but if you're fighting to clear your name, you need disclosure. And so I think there's a lot of things that need to be changed. And I think today, to be honest with you, a lot of people were not getting acquittals. They're giving stays and withdrawals. And I think the compensation thing has come into play where, if they give you an acquittal, then you can sue for compensation. And, then that they're looking at having to give up money. And I think a lot of times they're trying to give a remedy of a stay instead and a withdrawal when you really deserve an acquittal, because I think they're thinking of the compensation issue, which they should not be thinking of. And in my humble opinion, if you wrongly convicted something, the least you can do is compensate them and make sure that they have a roof over their head and they can feed their children, et cetera, et cetera. But so there's lots of things, and I suppose if you spoke to a lawyer, and I'm not one, there's a lot of laws that could be changed that would be helpful. But on one hand, you've got the victims' rights people, and then on the other hand, you've got people who are fighting for the rights of the accused, and it's an adversarial system, and and everybody has their part to play. But it's troubling to me. It's troubling that things don't always happen the way people think they do in a court of law. It's a stage. It's almost like a play. Everybody has their part to play, and sometimes the person who plays his part best wins, and sometimes that means that somebody innocent can be convicted of something they didn't do. And the competence of a lawyer is very, very important. And I personally think most people don't know a good lawyer from a bad lawyer, and how are you going to know that if you've never been involved in the criminal justice system before? So there's so much going against you. I mean, think about it. If you were to be picked up today, and I could walk out of my house and be picked up and accused of something, charged with something, where do you turn? I mean, most people don't know what to do, and they are scared, and not everybody can afford James Lockyer, by the way, even though he's probably one of the best lawyers in this country, he does do legal aid, but a lot of lawyers do not. And, but in Ontario, for instance, legal aid, some very good lawyers actually take legal aid. So that's a good thing on Ontario, because some of the top lawyers are actually willing to take legal aid against you in the system to be And, and I've had so many people call me a mother, calling me, I had no idea, until this happened to my son. And people don't know until it does happen to them. Most people don't, know their criminal justice system, don't know how it runs. And, and I think people should be more aware, educate themselves about their own system, because you never know. People like to believe it wouldn't happen to them because they're good people, but, Stephen Truscott was a very good person, only 14 years old, never did anything wrong in his life, and yet he was convicted of murder. So it doesn't matter. We've had a number of squeaky clean people like Stephen Truscott, but they still got convicted of a horrible, heinous crime.
Well, thank you very much, Wynne. It's been a most enlightening talk you gave us today, and really appreciate it. Any other comments from anybody here? Yes, I'm just passing you. Here you are. Introduce yourself.
I am just wondering if the opposite is true, where people are getting off when they should be imprisoned. Like, are there case numbers on that?
I look into wrongful conviction, so I don't know what. I'm not here to get people off. I'm here to get innocent people out of prison who unfortunately were, the right person obviously didn't get convicted. So there's somebody out there who's probably committing more crimes, but I have no idea how many people get off, because how would I know that? I don't know who's innocent or guilty. I mean, only on the cases that I look at, I have no idea, but I am honest enough to tell you that most people that are convicted and go to prison are guilty of what they've done. But there is a percentage that are not, and they shouldn't be there.
Thank you. Thanks again, Wynne. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Really appreciate what you've given us, and given us a lot of information to think about. And I believe you've got an AGM coming up on the 21st of June, and
yes,
you'll have a lot of...
AGM on June the 21st in Toronto, and we have one every year, and it's open to the public. Anybody come, and Graham, I think you and your wife are coming. So that will be wonderful, and that's when you get to meet some of the wrongly convicted, and so it has a business aspect to it, but it has a second half to it, which is very, very different, where we have a speaker. And this year we're having Ron Dalton's sister, who looked after his 3 children while he was in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and she's going to be speaking about the effects it has on the family. And then we are going to pay tribute to a wonderful man who was a good friend of mine, Billy Wine, who just passed away, who was on our board, and who had dedicated much of his life to, once he got interested in wrongful convictions, and and we're going to be paying tribute to him. So it's going to be jam-packed, but and then my daughter actually serves a lunch later, so it's all good. And then we have wrongful conviction day. I don't know if it's going to be on October the 2nd this year, but anybody can have a wrongful conviction day. But our big event in Toronto is usually on October the 2nd. But I understand that's a Jewish holiday, so maybe it'll be the 3rd this year. We're not sure. We haven't chosen the date, but when I do, of course, I'll let you know.
Thank you very much again,
And then in
Wynne.
September, I'm having a retreat for the wrongly convicted. A wonderful lawyer by the name of David Bayless, he and his son built this beautiful log home. He allows me to use it to have a retreat to bring the wrongly convicted together. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, and would love to have met people in person. It's much more, I enjoy Guelph, and of course Stephen Truscott and Marlene and their family lived there, and it would have been nice to have dropped by to see them. But in any case, God bless everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much again, Wynne. Thank you, everyone, again for coming today, and thank you to the people on Zoom that have been following this remotely as well. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be hearing from Go-Go Grannies again, and that'll be quite interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye.